There was a time when Marconi was everywhere. Its technology helped ships talk across oceans. It carried voices through the air. It helped build the first real communication networks in the world. Governments trusted it. Engineers respected it. The modern world quietly depended on it. And then, slowly, it faded. Not through one catastrophe, but through a long decline of bad decisions, risky investments, and quiet mistakes that built up over time. By the time people noticed, the company was already falling apart. This is the story of Guglielmo Marconi, the man who transformed wireless communication from an impossible dream into the foundation of modern connectivity, and how his legacy was dismantled by forces he could never have anticipated. It started very simply with a young man, a few basic tools, some wires and batteries. There was no big funding behind him. No powerful friends in government or industry. No official training or credentials from established institutions. Just pure curiosity driving everything forward. Guglielmo Marconi was obsessed with one idea that consumed his thoughts: sending messages without wires, communicating across distances without physical connection. At the time, it sounded almost impossible to most people, even strange and impractical. He worked from home in small rooms with makeshift setups and equipment that often broke or failed unexpectedly. Most of his experiments did not work as planned. Signals disappeared into nothing. Parts overheated and burned out. Nothing was stable or predictable. But he kept going despite the failures. He believed something was there waiting to be discovered, something just out of reach that could change everything. And slowly, through endless trial and error, through thousands of small failures that taught him more than any success, he began to understand it. The air could carry messages. Invisible waves could travel through space carrying human voices and signals. That idea would eventually change the entire world. But at the start, it was just one determined young man refusing to give up on what everyone else dismissed as impossible. The first real workspaces were small and crowded and messy. Wooden tables filled with wires wound by hand. Coils created through patience and repetition. Tools scattered everywhere in apparent disorder. The air smelled strongly of hot metal and burnt insulation and chemical compounds. Marconi was no longer alone in this work. A few engineers and helpers joined him, drawn by his vision and determination. Some were skilled craftspeople. Others were just learning and growing into the work. All of them were experimenting constantly, pushing boundaries. The sounds were sharp and uneven, clicks from sparks, crackling bursts of signal cutting through silence. Nothing was smooth or refined yet. They built what they needed from whatever materials and parts they had available. Resources were limited, so improvisation became a necessary skill. Mistakes were common and constant. But each mistake taught them something valuable and important. Then one day, a signal traveled further than they had expected or thought possible. Then further again, surprising everyone. And then something remarkable happened. A signal crossed water, jumping across distance that should have been impossible. That moment was quiet. There was no cheering or celebration. Just shock and understanding. They knew something fundamental had changed. Messages no longer needed wires strung across the landscape. And once that idea worked, once it was proven possible, there was no going back to the old ways. The company began to grow as demand increased. Slowly at first, but with gathering momentum. Orders came in from shipping companies and naval forces. Equipment was shipped out in wooden crates to destinations around the world. Small factories opened to meet growing demand. Inside those factories, young workers learned quickly how to build the equipment, how to test it thoroughly, how to fix problems when they arose. The smell of solder filled the air constantly. Machines hummed in rhythm. Voices echoed across the factory floor. Marconi equipment was installed on ships crossing oceans. Navies began to rely on it for communication and safety. Messages that once took days to travel by messenger could now travel in minutes through the air. That changed everything about how the world worked. People trusted the system because it worked reliably. The name Marconi started to mean something important and trustworthy. Inside the factory, workers felt genuinely proud of their contribution. They were not just making products for profit. They were helping connect the world and making it safer and more connected. But growth never stands still. It always asks for more investment, more workers, more production. Marconi's technology spread everywhere, becoming part of everyday life. Homes began to receive radio broadcasts through the air. Voices came through radios, thin, crackling, but real and immediate. News traveled faster than ever before in human history. Music filled rooms that had once been silent and isolated. The world started to feel smaller and more connected. Inside the company, work continued day and night to keep up with demand. Engineers improved the designs constantly, making them better and more reliable. Workers built more units, faster and with better quality. There were small, quiet moments too that mattered greatly. A technician carefully adjusting a tiny part with precision. Understanding that one small mistake could affect a signal traveling far away. Marconi was no longer just a company making products. It was part of everyday life for millions of people. But success brings pressure, and pressure changes things in ways that are not always positive. At its peak, Marconi was massive and powerful. Large factories sprawled across locations. Thousands of workers labored in them daily. Products were shipped across the entire world to every continent. Governments signed major contracts and depended on Marconi equipment. The company received awards and recognition for innovation. It had become a global leader in communications technology. Visitors walked through the factories, watching in amazement at how everything was made. There was confidence in the air, a sense that nothing could stop the company's growth. It felt like the company would last forever, that it had achieved permanent status. But large companies carry heavy weight. And sometimes, that weight becomes too much to bear. The higher you go, the harder it is to stay there, and the further the fall becomes. At its busiest point, the factory was alive with activity and purpose. The air was thick with distinctive smells, solder flux, warm metal, chemicals, treated wood all mingling together. Heat filled every room and corridor. Workers stood at long rows of benches, working in rhythm. Hands moved quickly but carefully through practiced motions. Each part was built step by step with attention. Machines hummed in the background like a heartbeat. Tools clicked and snapped with regularity. Every now and then, a signal would be tested, a sharp sound cutting through all the noise, a reminder of what they were building. People worked hard every day. But they were proud of their work. They knew their labor mattered to the wider world. It felt steady and strong and permanent, like it would continue forever. But nothing stays that way forever, no matter how much we wish it would. The changes were small at first and easily overlooked. New management arrived with new ideas and new decisions. Money started going into projects far removed from the core business. Not everything was focused on wireless communication anymore. There was pressure to grow faster and expand into new markets. To make more money. To spend less on production and quality. On the factory floor, things began to shift in subtle ways. Cheaper parts were substituted for quality materials. Faster processes replaced careful craftsmanship. Small changes that did not seem important in isolation. But people noticed, even if management did not. Engineers noticed the difference in components. Workers noticed the pressure to work faster. Still, the company kept moving forward through momentum. Nothing had broken yet. Nothing had failed catastrophically. But something fundamental had changed in the company's values. The decline was slow and stretched across years. Not through one catastrophe, but through a long retreat, step by step, decision by decision. Manufacturing began to change in fundamental ways. Some work moved to other countries where labor was cheaper. Processes became simpler but less refined. Quality slowly dropped as corners were cut. New competitors entered the market aggressively. They were faster to produce, cheaper to buy. Technology was changing quickly across the entire industry. Inside Marconi, decisions were made to keep up with these changes and threats. Each one made sense on its own individual basis. But together, accumulated over time, they weakened the company's foundation. The original focus and purpose was fading away. The company that once led the entire industry was now trying to catch up with competitors. And that is a hard, demoralizing place to be. Then the financial problems became impossible to hide or deny. Investments failed and lost money. Debt increased beyond manageable levels. Confidence dropped among investors and customers. Meetings became tense and uncomfortable. People stopped speaking openly about problems. Words like cuts and restructuring became common in conversations. Orders slowed down significantly. Factories faced permanent closure. Workers knew something was fundamentally wrong, even before it was officially announced. And then it happened, not all at once but in a series of painful steps. Divisions were sold to other companies. Operations shut down. There was no single dramatic ending that people could point to. Just a series of losses that accumulated until there was almost nothing left of the original company. The factories did not remain as monuments or historical sites. They closed their doors. Workers left and never returned. Machines were removed and sold for scrap. Buildings were torn down completely. In their place came something ordinary and forgettable. Shops and parking lots and new buildings with no history or memory. There were no signs marking what had once stood there. No plaques acknowledging the achievement. No memorials to the workers who built the future. Just empty space where something important once thrived. The people who worked there moved on to find new jobs and build new lives. Their stories were rarely recorded or preserved. The past faded quietly, as if it had never truly existed at all. The name Marconi did not disappear completely from use. But it changed fundamentally in meaning. It was used for new products and new businesses that had little real connection to the original company and its values. To outsiders, it looked the same on paper. But it was not the same in any meaningful way. The meaning was gone. The craftsmanship was gone. The purpose was gone. All of it faded away. What remained was just a name, familiar to some but empty of its original significance. The company is gone, dissolved into history. The factories are gone, demolished and replaced. Most of the people who work there are gone too, scattered to other lives. But the idea remains, preserved in memory and in the technology that surrounds us. The belief that messages can travel through the air without wires. That distance can be reduced to nothing. That connection across space is possible. That idea lives on today in every signal, every broadcast, every communication that happens wirelessly. The people who built the original company are mostly forgotten by the wider world. But their work is not truly gone. Not through one catastrophe, but through a long journey of effort and belief, they created something that lasted beyond their lifetimes. And in that achievement, there is something important and worth remembering. The company may be gone. The factories may have vanished. But the signal continues, carrying their legacy forward into the future.